You'd be shocked if you knew what the rich really pay for. We see the Ferraris, the castles, the expensive vacations they flash on Instagram. But what I've seen goes far beyond that, into something darker, something most people wouldn't survive witnessing, let alone seeking out. And no, I'm not rich, but I've had access to these facilities. And I can tell you, I haven't just heard, I've seen these things myself. And I had this much access because I was a high-level security guard for Diddy. We often judge the poor for doing whatever it takes to survive. But we never stop to ask, what are the rich willing to do to stay in control? What are they trying to suppress, erase, or keep alive behind closed doors? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments if you have an idea, and also where you are watching from. And if you're still listening, share and subscribe. Because what I'm about to share was never meant to leave the room. I used to think guarding someone like Diddy meant watching for outside threats, paparazzi, stalkers, jealous rivals. But the real danger never came from the outside. It lived beneath his estate, down a corridor where the cameras didn't reach. A room no one mentioned, but everyone obeyed. They came at night, actors, executives, people whose faces you've seen 1,000 times. They didn't scream. They didn't resist. They walked in like they were late for something they couldn't miss. And when they left, they carried marks you weren't supposed to notice. I was told to stand by the door, keep it shut, wait for the light to turn red. At first, it was the sounds that got to me. But after a while, it was the silence, the thick, humming quiet that followed. The way some of them smiled as they limped out. Like the pain had done something, like they needed it. And Diddy, he never stepped foot in that room. He just watched, always from behind the glass, like the suffering meant more to him than the people themselves. The first client I saw was a man in a suit that didn't belong in a basement. He looked like someone used to private jets and sealed boardrooms. His car came through a side gate. No plates, no escort. He walked past me with the calm of someone checking in to something pre-booked. No words. No eye contact. Just motion. I remember how he removed his watch, phone, and a silver ring without being asked. Like it was part of the ritual. The room itself wasn't what I expected. No chains, no visible restraints. Just one chair, a metal floor, and a dull ceiling light that buzzed when it got too quiet. At first glance, it looked empty. But the longer you stared, the more it felt alive. The kind of place that doesn't forget what happens inside it. The man stepped in, took off his blazer, then his shirt. He placed them neatly on the floor, then stood there. Bare chest rising and falling. His hands open like he was ready to be read. I couldn't hear much through the security glass, but his lips were moving, repeating something over and over. It wasn't prayer. There was no desperation in it, just rhythm. Then the light turned red. My earpiece clicked on, static first, then sound. Not screams, just something wet, methodical, like someone tearing fabric piece by piece. Then silence. Then again. I don't know if it was him making the noise or someone doing it to him, but whatever it was, it didn't stop until the light went white again. When the door opened, he stepped out barefoot. His shirt was soaked. His eyes were wide, unblinking, but dry. He didn't ask for his things. He didn't look back, just walked past like the hallway didn't exist. That was when I realized they weren't being punished. They were being processed. I started noticing patterns. They never arrived during the day, always between 2 and 4 a.m., never in groups, never escorted. And when they left, it was the same. No lingering, no backward glance. Just a quiet walk to a waiting car, like they just finished something necessary, but shameful. Like they weren't returning from punishment, but from a place that had stripped something out of them and left the skin behind. Some of them I recognized instantly. Faces from billboards, voices from stadium speakers. One had just finished a TED Talk about healing childhood trauma. Another had a charity named after his mother. But in that hallway, they all looked the same. hollow, focused, as if they'd come to shed a part of themselves too loud to carry anymore. Among the staff, there were whispers. Some called it reversal therapy. Others said it was spiritual, a ritual to burn off debt no one else could see. But no one asked questions out loud. We all felt it. The weight of that room. The way it seemed to pull more than it gave. And Diddy, he never said a word about it. Not once. But he watched every session, every scream, every silence. Not like a man observing pain, but like someone checking on an investment. Like he wasn't feeding the room, he was feeding off it. Whatever they came to leave behind in there, I started to wonder if some of it stayed. If the room kept pieces of them, long after they were gone. And if I stood outside long enough, how much of me it might take too. I wasn't supposed to see what happened inside. Not really. My job was to stay on the outside of the door, monitor the hallway, and keep the red light in my peripheral vision. That was it. But there was a night when the system glitched. Just for a moment. The internal feed cut from static into a camera angle I didn't know existed. It was mounted high in the corner of the room, wide enough to see everything. I should have turned away. Should have reported the error and let it reset. But I didn't. I leaned in to have a look. A woman was already inside. She had long black hair and wore a pale blue sweatshirt, like she'd come from a yoga class or a late night flight. No shoes. Her feet were bare against the cold floor, but she didn't flinch. Her hands were shaking, but her posture was straight. She stood in the center of the room, eyes closed, whispering to herself. Not as a prayer, and she wasn't in panic either. After a while, a panel in the wall slid open, slow and silent. A tray slid out, 5 objects neatly placed side by side. They weren't weapons, nothing sharp. Just strange clinical tools I didn't recognize, cold metal, rubber grips, something that looked like a sensory mask or mouthpiece. She opened her eyes and studied them like someone choosing a bottle of wine. No hesitation. She reached for the second object, something silver with a narrow hook at the end. Then she turned and placed it gently on the chair behind her. That's when she spoke aloud. Just one sentence. I deserve this because I lied to them for years. Her voice didn't shake when she said it. It was clear, almost peaceful. Then she took a step forward and faced the black glass, the same one Diddy always sat behind. She nodded once. That's all it took. The light overhead turned red. The next minute was the longest I've ever lived through. The audio kicked in through my earpiece, not as a full feed, but just enough to let me hear her breathing. At first it was steady. Then it began to hitch, not from panic or any force. Something was happening. Her body moved like she'd rehearsed it. Every jolt was met with stillness. Every spasm was followed by silence. I don't know if she was doing it to herself, or if someone was doing it to her. But whatever it was, it wasn't random. It had rhythm, like music with no sound. Then the breathing changed. I could hear she was in serious pain, but oddly, it also felt like she was releasing herself in a way. Like she was letting go of a scream she never got to make. That's when I heard it. The thank you, whispered once. Then again, thank you, thank you. The light turned white. She collapsed to her knees, not unconscious, just still. Her head tilted forward, her palms open on the floor. She stayed like that until the door opened. I backed away from the screen before she walked out, but I heard the soft steps behind the wall, and I knew she was gone. Later that night, I saw her leaving through the lower gate. Someone handed her a coat. She was smiling, a faint, broken smile, but it stayed on her face until the car door closed. That was the first time I truly understood this wasn't just about pain. They came here to feel something again. Or maybe to feel nothing at all. But surprisingly enough, some of them didn't just come once. There was a man who returned 3 times in 2 weeks. Always around the same hour. He doesn't speak much. He'd often nod when spoken to and handed over whatever he was carrying. The second time he came, his eyes looked heavier. And when he left the room that night, he didn't look like someone who had been hurt. He looked like someone who'd given something up. I watched him closer after that. There was a stiffness in how he moved, like his body hadn't fully adjusted to being outside the room again. But he never winced, never flinched. He walked out calmly, picked up his things, and disappeared down the same hallway like nothing had happened. He came back again the next. That's when I started noticing others too. A woman with a short red scarf who limped slightly every time she left. A man with burned scars along his forearm that seemed fresh but healing. None of them reacted when they were called in. They just followed instructions, walked the hallway, and waited for the light to turn red. Mind you, these were very wealthy people. By then I had stopped trying to pretend this was therapy. There was something else pulling them back. I knew it wasn't comfort or healing. I watched a young guy come out one night, both hands shaking so hard he couldn't pick up his phone from the tray. He stood there, staring at it like he'd forgotten what it was for. Then he took a deep breath, wiped his palms on his jeans, and walked out without it. I asked a fellow guard what he thought was happening. He'd been there longer than I had. He just shrugged and said, "They're not here to fix anything. They're here because they don't know how to carry what's left." I didn't say anything back, but I kept a tally. Not names, just marks. A simple line for every return visit I saw. Within a month, I had over 20. Same faces, same silence. And every time, they came out a little more distant than before. It stopped feeling like a facility. Started feeling more like a loop. Like they were caught inside something, and the room was the only place where they could remember who they used to be. Or maybe forget it altogether. Diddy still hadn't said a word, but I knew he saw them, same as I did. And if any part of it bothered him, he never showed it. He just kept watching. I used to think that room worked the same for everyone. It looked that way. Same door, same red light, same silence pouring out once it shut. But that was just the surface. It started with this young dude, Rico. He runs errands for Diddy. He wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to end up in a place like that. But then again, no one was ever safe from Diddy. Something must have gone wrong, money misplaced, a message passed to the wrong hands. Or maybe he just spoke when he shouldn't have. I don't know. I only know he was called downstairs, to the hallway. I walked him there myself. He kept trying to joke it off, said the room was only meant for the big names, the damaged and powerful. His pace slowed once we got close. I didn't answer. I just opened the door. The red light came on. What followed wasn't like the others. No faint breathing through my earpiece. No repeated phrases. Just Diddy's voice. Clear and close, cutting through the wall like it belonged there. "You thought I wouldn't find out." I couldn't see into the feed this time, because I was right outside the door. But I knew he wasn't going to survive that experience. When the light turned white, two men went in. They brought Rico out slumped between them. His shirt was soaked with his own blood, his face puffed beyond recognition. His hands dangled loose by his sides, and his eyes didn't seem to focus on anything at all. I never saw him again. That's when I understood something I hadn't wanted to. Not everyone who entered that room did so by choice. The wealthy arrived prepared, calm and focused, carrying their shame like it had already been measured and accounted for. But the others, like poor Rico, were given no choice. There was this other girl from the party. Quiet, I heard she was trying to sell out Diddy's secrets. But sadly, she sold this to some of the men planted by Diddy himself to disguise as his own enemy, just to know those around him who could betray him. She was called into the hallway, but I never saw or heard her name mentioned again. The room hadn't changed, but the fear around it had. There were two different kinds of pain in that hallway. One was scheduled, measured, wrapped in silence and money. The other was punishment and death. And Diddy knew exactly which one he was giving. It was never about pain. It was always about who had the right to walk out of it whole. It took me a while to understand what the room really was. People called it therapy, punishment, even penance. But none of those were true. What Diddy built wasn't spiritual. It wasn't healing. It was business, the kind that doesn't get written down. See, the powerful don't go to prison. They don't get called out or canceled or shamed like the rest of us. So when the guilt eats them, when their crimes catch up in private, they need somewhere to drop it all. Somewhere dark, discreet, untraceable. That's what Diddy offered them, a place to suffer quietly and leave clean. But it came with a cost. Every session was documented. Every whisper, every breakdown, every confession of who they hurt, how they lied, or what they couldn't take back, recorded. Not by accident, not for safety, for ownership. And once Diddy had that, he didn't need loyalty. He had leverage. Some of the names I recognized, big ones. People who ran companies, owned networks, sat on political boards. They came in looking hollow and left even more broken. But they stayed in line. Because they knew Diddy was holding something they couldn't afford to lose. And I don't think he set out to blackmail anyone. Not at first. But over time, the files piled up. He started to understand the weight he was holding, started using it. A closed-door negotiation here, a silent buyout there, donations, endorsements, disappearances. There were whispers that he controlled things beyond the music business. That entire scandals were buried before they made it to court. That some of the overdoses and rehab stays were just rebranding after a session gone too far. I never saw the files myself, not directly. But I saw how certain people moved around him, how quickly they'd shut down when his name came up, how fast some of them changed lawyers or dropped projects altogether. He had them cornered, and someone hated him for that. Maybe it was one of the clients, maybe it was someone above them. But he stepped on the wrong toes, someone who didn't care how many secrets he had, only that he'd forgotten his place. And now he's where they always wanted him. Stripped, caged, discredited. But even there, I wonder if he still holds the tapes. Or if someone else has them now. Because when you build a vault full of other people's sins, the world only gives you two options. Hand it over, or get buried with it. Some people still think he's locked away because of guns or drugs. But if you've been paying attention, you know better than that. If you're ready to keep digging, hit like, share it, and make sure you're subscribed. After Diddy got taken in, everything changed, but not in the way you'd expect. There were no public outbursts, no statements, no flood of interviews from those who once stood next to him on red carpets or inside boardrooms. Instead, things just went quiet. People started pulling away fast. I saw producers delete photos. Artists who used to call him brother suddenly weren't available for comment. That's how you know the fear is real. When even the ones who owe him everything start scrubbing his name from their mouths like it never touched them. But it wasn't just PR. This was deeper. A few of the old regulars disappeared overnight. No notice. No farewell tours. Gone. Rumors floated. One was out of the country. Another checked into some retreat that didn't even show up on the map. Lawyers were getting replaced. Shell companies were dissolving. Money was moving fast through strange pipelines, like someone was flushing out the rot before it traced back to them. I even saw a couple names reappear in church circles. Big names. The kind of people who used to show up to the house late at night, wearing black and never staying long. Now they were front row at Sunday services, trying to bleach their names with God. But they weren't fooling anyone, not me, because I know what fear looks like. And this wasn't about guilt. This was self-preservation. See, Diddy didn't just go down for what he did. He went down for what he knew. And the moment the cuffs locked around his wrists, every man and woman who ever set foot in that room felt it deep in their chest. That if those tapes ever saw the light of day, it wouldn't be one man's career going up in flames. It would be an entire system unraveling, thread by thread. So they did the only thing they knew how to do. They got quiet. They say justice is finally catching up to him. But if you've been close to power, really close, you know better than to believe that. Diddy wasn't the beginning. He's not the end either. He's just the name they could finally afford to lose. And the rest of them are still out there, watching and waiting. acting like none of it ever happened. So I kept thinking, how many men like Diddy do we still have out there, roaming and smiling into the cameras like angels? Comment if you think Diddy was the only one. And if you want to keep hearing what they'd rather you forget, like, share, and subscribe.